So, what exactly do you mean when you say, what do you mean?
I do not understand this. This really confuses me.
What's that supposed to mean?
Literally.
What's that supposed to mean?
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
What's that supposed to mean?
Cultural anthropologist Ujwal Kalgood and Motive-Based president Jason Partridge will tell you that perception and meaning are the primary pressure points that shape and create the world we live in.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word.
Let's explore why meaning matters.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Now, here's your host, Aaron Trafford.
All right, I'm just going to start this episode by saying I'm sort of glad that I'm here for today's show because I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that what we want to talk about today would make sense without a woman on the mic. And guys, feel free to bring your wives into the conversations, your girlfriends, whoever, because this might get uncomfortable for you. But this is what we do on Why Meaning Matters. This is the show where we aim to answer the question in the title. We aim to help you as a business, an organization, a brand, navigate the changing meanings and culture so that you can better reach your best and highest value clients and consumers and really hit them where it counts, right? And I mean, Jason and Ujwal, we did an entire episode this season on cow farts. So now is the time to talk about periods.
Yeah.
Did I make you
challenge
uncomfortable?
Accepted.
Okay.
No,
Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted.
Not at all, because I think that's the joy of being an anthropologist. You get to, I tell this to people in interviews that, if I didn't have this profession, I wouldn't know anything about a lot of things that we get to learn about because they don't affect my life directly.
But they do. But they do.
That's exactly what I was going to say is when you start to learn about these things, you realize, hang on a second, this is incredible because it makes you. I'm not trying to blow smoke up all our bums here, but it makes you a better human being when you learn about the world. This is an example of one such topic. I also think, just as a setup, Aaron, we have, when we were talking about cannabis in an earlier episode, we talked about stigma, right? This is one of those topics that has so much stigma. Forget about men, it has so much stigma for women, and the industry has done a terrible job in the past of worsening the stigma around this. So that's why I'm super excited to talk about what we're broadly describing as menstrual health or period health or what have you, because in particular, first of all, there's so much to unpack here, but there's one area in particular that I would love to dive into, which is there's an aspect of menstrual health that is changing right now. And it's in the forefront. And it's this notion of what women consider to be basic hygiene, quote unquote, basic hygiene. What does that mean in the context of menstrual health? Something really cool going on there.
And let's dig into that. I'll give you some personal context for this too, is that I think I kind of got ostracized in one of my university classes years and years ago. We were talking about, it was a very boring seminar we were in. We were talking about tax structure and, provincial taxes, federal taxes. And I came out in the middle of the class and I said, why is there tax on menstrual products? To me at that point, what I was doing was, without realizing, was calling truth to power and saying, like, just the sheer fact that there's tax on it tells me that there's an imbalance here in the way that we're messaging how vital these things are and how important they are. So let's talk about that. What is changing with our concept of basic hygiene? Because it also becomes an accessibility thing, right? Like when there's
100%.
tampons and maxi pads at the library for free and there are women who can't afford to purchase them going there to get them. Like, to me, that's a signal that there is a disparity here. So what's changing? Tell me what's changing. I'm hoping it's for the better.
Honestly, the gender tax is a whole other thing, and it's one of those conversations that we actually want to bring our head of research, Amy, to that conversation as well. But for today's episode, I want to talk about a couple of aspects of basic hygiene to get us going. One of those aspects is this notion of hair. So obviously, we're talking about pubic hair here, but traditionally, hair has become, especially in the last couple of decades, has gotten associated with this notion of a lack of hygiene, being dirty, being messy. And that itself is being challenged by consumers, by women. And the reason it's being challenged is because there's this realization that it is an expectation that bears no specific scientific reality to it, right? It's an expectation that is yet again sort of deeply entrenched because of the dominance exerted by the man in culture,
patriarchal.
and it's a patriarchal expectation, and it's certainly a problem in culture, and it's being challenged. And I think that's one example where we're seeing a lot of conversation. And I'll also say this: organizations that operate in this space are terrified about talking about these issues, right? So that's another reason why we're doing this episode, because guys, like, you need to get over it, right? It's just basic human context.
Well, it's interesting too, though, Uj, right? Because again, like going back to the whole notion that everything is connected, right? And if you think about the, the archetype for femininity from 20 years ago, and the idea of the kind of the bleached blonde bikini wearing model that is airbrushed to 9 times to Sunday, and that was the kind of the epitome of what we thought of as the quote unquote the ideal. And again, I'm not saying it's people's ideal, but it was the media's ideal. It was movies ideal. It was kind of the television Baywatch ideal. Now move forward to present day, and all of a sudden we see emerging challenges push up against that ideal. We see a movement within, beauty and skincare that pushes towards a more natural aesthetic. We see a push towards holistic wellness and towards health and towards actually making choices for oneself that protect the body inside and out. And now all of a sudden we, let's head downstairs. Now all of a sudden the question becomes is, where did this expectation of bear down there come from? What is driving it? Whose idea was this? And why is this something that is even kind of proliferating? And now all of a sudden you've got educated women that are saying there is a purpose for pubic hair. There is a purpose for why our bodies are a certain way. And when we mess with it, it messes us up. And that starts to basically kind of be a pushback against the expectation. And that's where expectations start to change.
How much does this, and I want to tie this to the last conversation we had about cell phones, because I think cell phones has also become somewhat synonymous with social media, but how much of this shift has been, do you think, accelerated through apps that are more female dominated, like the Instagrams and the Pinterests? And I'm thinking specifically, Jason, because you just made me think of something, is that I am getting inundated with ads, and oddly enough, the ads that I see result in me following the accounts for these new underwear companies, and their messaging is our underwear is better for your health down there overall because it's not made with synthetic materials and it does all of these things. How much of this do you think is tied to our connection to the social media world?
It's huge. I mean, you take the example of the free bleeding movement. Social media has really brought it to life, right? And now it's transferring over into products. So, the classic example of this being, I guess, period underwear or period undies or whatever you want to call them. But the reason why this connects to this notion of basic hygiene is that, in the past, women have been told, at least in the West, women have been told that we don't want the blood to even make its way out, right? You got to catch it even before it makes its way out. Hide that damn thing. That's been the narrative. The red and so the tampon is synonymous with that narrative. And now with new developments and the realization that consumers are having that these products were not built to make us comfortable. These products were only built so that men can feel comfortable about whatever it is that's going on for us. These were not built so we can be comfortable for a few days a month. And so with that the proliferation of the free bleeding movement transferring into new product development. There are amazing products now that are specifically built for, let's say, heavier flow days, that are period underwear, that are genuinely 10 times more comfortable, and we can see consumers talking about this. But there's a symbolism around that, right? Which is that the symbolism is this thing isn't hiding the way it used to be. And the other symbolism is that this is actually better for vaginal health. And so that makes a huge difference, makes a huge impact. So there's a lot of these movements that are slowly bubbling to the surface. They're developing from myth to truth. And if you're a company that is operating in the, broadly speaking, the feminine hygiene space, these are significant shifts impacting all of your product lines.
This is everything that you said, just like, again, I felt viscerally in my body. So I had never thought of the tampon as like a symbol of the patriarchy until you just said that. That blew my mind. The other link I'm seeing is period underwear and all of those things. Huge link to all those conversations we've been having about sustainability, because I live, you guys know this, I live about 50 feet from the Atlantic coastline, and we walk on the beach all the time. Do you know what the number one thing that washes up on the beach is? Tampon applicators.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the number one thing. Yes, they're called beach whistles and they're gross, but that's what they are.
Wow.
And so there's this whole tie to, if I don't need the tampon, I'm also not contributing to the death of our oceans, right? That is a thing in my brain, at least. And then, okay, so you're blowing my mind. Maybe I needed to have this conversation.
Well,
with
you just blew my mind as well. So
I know. I do think that one interesting thing, Aaron, and again, I just want to touch on your reference to social, because I think the other thing that we're seeing is that social has done two things. It has basically kind of made more information accessible to people that wouldn't have had it before, and it started to challenge taboo. So, you know, when I see an episode of Hacks and two female comedians are talking about the difference between tampons and a Diva cup, it means that something is starting to kind of come into the foreground, as opposed to being something that's taboo that we can't talk about. You know, when I watch an animated show on Fox called The Great Outdoors, and there's an entire episode about the tampons in the girls' washroom, it means that things are starting to be talked about in a way that wasn't happening 15, 20 years ago. And that in and of itself is basically kind of creating different narratives and different tensions and challenges in what is the right thing to do.
This is also fascinating. When I remember when I did my first radio gig up in North Bay, Ontario, and my co-host had two daughters, and he was really uncomfortable with the fact that they had started their periods, and he called out that he's like, all these period commercials on TV make it sound like, you know, when you get your period, you're doing gymnastics, fencing, riding horses, doing all of these crazy things that, like, it's very patriarchal, right? So he had this joke that whenever a woman was on her period, he'd say, "Where's my horse?" And that was like how we talked about it. And now it's all landing for me, thinking that was 20 years ago, how different things are now. He can probably freely have that conversation with his daughters and not have a problem with it. Anyway, this has been fascinating, and I can't wait to meet Amy. I want to know more about what she's finding out at a deeper level, especially the whole gender tax. And there's so much here. There's so much here. The future is female, guys.
Future is female. Hey, gender tax, smell, there's so much to get into. We're excited.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much for a fascinating conversation today. This is Why Meaning Matters. If you have comments about the show, feel free to drop us an email at hello@storystudionetwork.com, and make sure you follow us wherever you consume your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, wherever that may be. And please share this show, especially with your male colleagues and your female colleagues. Let's get this one out to the masses. Personally, I would appreciate it. And we'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Why Meaning Matters with Ujwal Kulgud, Jason Partridge, and your host, Aaron Trafford.
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Why Meaning Matters is produced for Motive Base and the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.